3.3 The economic system of the Roman Empire. At the height of the Roman Empire, figure 3.2, 1 million residents of the city of Rome were supported by 8,100 million subjects. Impressive military power, effective communication, and efficient transportation networks, roads and ships, allowed Rome to control a huge land area and to generate a steady inflow of goods and wealth. Rome was able to demand rents, taxes, tributes, and gifts from citizens and conquered provinces because of its military control of the region. Imported products included food, fruits, grains, honey, wine, olive oil, meats, metals, gold and silver to make coins, copper, tin, iron, and lead, materials, marble, ivory, pottery, and cloth, and slaves. These resources were used to maintain the army, administer the government, support the city, and allow the elite to live in luxury. The class system was complex. The emperor and Roman elite who controlled the Senate, the patricians, sat atop the empire and received most of the wealth. They were expected, however, to redistribute some of their wealth to the poor during food shortages and to support public buildings and temples and the army when needed, so some measure of reciprocity still existed. Most professions, including crafts and trading, were considered dishonorable by the elite. Positions were hereditary, with titles and wealth being passed down from fathers to sons. Later, Romans of lower status could become a member of the elite if they amassed enough property. Underneath the upper class were the freeborn Roman plebeians, who varied in rank by wealth and position. Depending on their position, they could be free farmers, merchants, priests, government officials, and craftsmen, or they could be poor peasants and soldiers. They often worked in a variety of occupations alongside freed slaves, who had less rights than plebeians, and non-Roman free people. Slaves were the largest class of people, and they had no rights. Some of the luckier slaves served the emperor and the elite or worked as craftsmen or teachers, while others toiled in the mines or on farms under brutal conditions. In general, slaves only received subsistence, just enough food, clothing, and shelter to survive, and their surplus production went to their owner. Although there was growth in many non-agricultural professions, including soldiers, traders, priests, entertainers, and government, 95% of the population of the Roman Empire was involved in agriculture. In fact, agriculture would continue to dominate the economies of the world until the Industrial Revolution. In general, the aristocracy owned and controlled the land and labor of the economy. The emperor controlled trade, shipping, crafts, mines, coinage, tax collection, and markets via a centralized administration housed in Rome. Markets were quite limited, since most goods were produced by peasants or slaves for their master and because transport costs of the time were prohibitive. Also, most of the population consisted of slaves and other people with very little money, limiting the extent of the market. Hence, trade was mostly restricted to luxury goods for the elite, along with goods needed by the military and the state. The government, funded by taxes as well as funds from the emperor and the aristocracy, subsidized grain to reduce civil strife and economic hardship. So Rome had an early version of a welfare state support for the least well-off members of society, to limit the negative consequences of poverty. Not only were class relations vastly different in the Roman Empire when compared to traditional economies, but there were substantial gender differences as well. By the time of the Roman Empire, women had gone from being roughly equal to men in hunter-gatherer societies to being in a subordinate position. This accompanied the rise in the importance of warriors, and the allocation of captured slaves to those warriors. Men came to dominate farming, using their slaves to do the farm work for them. Cultural attitudes shifted along with these changing roles, until the belief that women were inferior to men became widespread. Women did not have the same rights and privileges as men in Rome, although they were generally considered to have the same social status as their husbands. The importance of male inheritance of property led to greater restrictions on the sexual behavior of women, as men sought to ensure that their spouses were faithful and bore their children. Men, however, bore no such sexual restrictions and frequently took advantage of their slaves. Eventually Rome began to stagnate as its slave-based economy became less productive and as the power of the army declined. Slavery was initially very productive as free farmers developed new farming techniques, especially irrigation, and brought new land into cultivation using slave labor. However, over time, economic growth stagnated. Free farmers, who were driven to increase their status by increasing their wealth, were displaced by the vast slave estates of the elite. The elite looked down on work and technology, and made no effort to develop new farming techniques. Slaves themselves had little interest in innovation because they had to work endlessly, no matter how innovative they were. Slaves also required intensive supervision and could not be trusted with complex independent tasks or tools that could be used as weapons. Also, the Roman Empire began to run short of slaves because so many died young or were killed, in revolts or in sport, and because of a reduction in conquests as the army's power decreased. The army shrank as the supply of free farmers and peasants dwindled due to war and economic stagnation. After many years of decline, Rome fell in 456 CE to Germanic invaders, and the era of empires in the Fertile Crescent came to an end. What followed in Europe was the era of feudalism, which lasted for the next 1,000 years.